So I'm Christopher Ahlberg. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Recorded Future, and I'm going to talk about what I call chasing foxes by the numbers, probably more specifically thinking about as patterns of life and how we can do this in what I will very liberally call hacker forums. So we'll start sort of in the world of attribution. Most of you in this room probably knows exactly what that is. I live in the US, I'm Swedish by background, but I live in the US, and funnily enough now in the election that's going on, sort of attribution has become like one of the top subjects of everything. It's sort of like it was the Russians who did it, or there was that 400-pound guy in a basement in Oregon who did it, and all of that stuff. Now, a lot of attribution, if we dig into all these sort of fancy reports that gets published, is many times is done based on what I would call sloppy handle usage. So we dive into the Mandiant report, APT1 report, and Ugly Gorilla sort of being all over the internet if you want, or Superhard, or Green Sky 27, CPYY, so on and so forth. And we sort of I'll just use the CPYY example here. Somebody does a domain registration, they use their handle, they keep using that handle sort of across the board. They use it in social media forums, or they might use it at a email site, some dev forum. And sometimes this isn't for a reason. Some of the Russian criminals will do this actually for really building out sort of a reputation, if you want, that is necessary for them. Others do it because they're sloppy. Others do it for other sort of reasons, maybe just to sort of stand out. Now, what we're going to talk about today is what do we do when our actors, if we'll call them that, apply some better OPSEC to things, and they actually do what I like to refer to as handle hopping. So if you think about it in the world of radio, where people might do radio frequency hopping. So what about if people change handles? This becomes hard. Then we don't have that benefit of chasing a handle. So how do we then find out what forums to target? How do we figure out what are the key handles to sort of focus in on? And most importantly, maybe, how do we deal with handle hopping within a forum or across forums? How do we find crews of handles and so on? So we're going to try to see if we can apply some math today. We're going to geek it out a little bit. Hopefully not too much of intimidating math. I might intimidate myself actually by doing that. But the way that we're going to think about this is in terms of pattern of life analysis. And those of you who sort of have a background in criminal background, or criminal investigations, or in counterterrorism and so on, probably have heard this word. And if you haven't, I'll sort of take you through it. So we're going to start off by looking at some generic sort of pattern of life analysis, and then dive into this world of hacker forums and try to apply that. So I'll start with this example. I don't know, anybody have seen this before? This is on the Uber blog. Maybe it's sort of a fun example. I hope it's fun. We'll see. On the Uber blog, maybe a year and a half ago or something like that, they had to take it down, and that's sort of what makes it fun. They looked at rides at Uber, took the whole data set. Somebody's taking a picture of that. That's good. They took the data set and looked for rides that started at 1 a.m., went to a house, and then had another car pick them up at 5 a.m. And you could sort of imagine that this is sort of, they called them rides of glory. And, they ended up in a lot of hot water for this. But the interesting sort of thing was, by looking at a large data set, in this case, San Francisco, they could identify hot areas where you actually might sort of end up in this sort of ride. And they could look across time and find out when this would happen. And no surprise, Valentine's Day in the US is a terrible time to actually end up in this situation, versus tax day being a great one. So you're sort of looking at large scale. So, tax day in, I don't remember what this district this is, sort of great time to go out. So I think that's sort of fun. We'll look at a more serious example. This is looking at crime in Chicago on a 24-hour cycle. The other one was sort of looking across a whole year. This is a 24-hour cycle, and at the top level, we have a panel here. I hope you can see it sort of towards the back, but a panel that basically shows that criminals actually go to sleep in the middle of the night, like anybody else. And we're actually going to come back to that pattern. Take it apart and look at crime. You can see that burglaries, sort of surprising. That was surprising to me. They peak at 9 a.m. in the morning, and when people have just left their houses. Actually, I thought it would be later, but that was sort of interesting. Kidnappings, this is sort of depressing, 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. Drop off and pick up in schools. That's sort of depressing. Narcotics is sort of interesting. People get high at night, but then we have this sort of lunch. I don't know anybody in this room. And the last example that is sort of depressing too, we got the sort of 8 p.m. for prostitution. And I'm like, yeah, that's sort of early. But then we got the 7 a.m. that I can't explain that. So we'll rapidly go on. Now, for those of you who have worked in counterterrorism and so on and been doing this sort of stuff, then you really do get into sort of when you try to take this to a different level and track individuals and really look at developing a pattern of life that you can use for arresting somebody or whatever you're doing. This is a great figure out of a book called Activity-Based Intelligence that you can pick up. And so you can sort of do this at a high level all the way down to pretty specific. Now, these examples are sort of nice and it's all clean and so on. And if you've ever done this, this is more what it feels like. This is Carrie's wall in Homeland. It's very unrealistic in many ways, primarily because she has all kinds of top secret data at home, which, usually not a good idea. But it's interesting if you remember this TV thing here. For example, she had that gap here when they had no data on the guy. And that's probably not a terrible sort of like this idea of being, even in something crazy like this, you can see patterns, and we'll sort of look for that. So now we're going to deal with these hacker forums, and I picked pictures here to make it a little scary forum stuff, as you can imagine. It's hairy because, these things, they move around and they come and go, and they're in, Russian and Arabic and Farsi and Chinese, and, so it's tricky stuff. So what we do at Recorded Future is that we collect on this stuff, to use Intel terms. So we run automated collection as much as we can and then overlay some human element to it. And we've done this sort of ongoingly over last 4 years, if you want, across a wide set of, now very liberally call it hacker forums. You've got carding forums and, very scamming stuff, or, all kinds of stuff here. 7 languages, it's all indexed, and maybe most importantly, we do a lot of natural language processing on this so that we can extract features. So one of the things we'll look at today is looking for people talking about CVEs and exploits that we'll use as sort of an indication to understand what the guys in the forum, or probably most guys, but mostly guys, but the people in the forum are actually interested in. So once we do that, now we can start looking at things. So the first thing, so out of this data set, we ended up with 1.4 million handles. Lots of leet speak there, if you think about it. A lot of variations in handles, because they're typically 8-9 characters long. So it's a lot of variations. So because it turns out that 96% of them are only used once. So pretty unique. It's pretty amazing, actually, if you think about it. So I wanted to do some distribution picture of that. But that in itself is sort of interesting. We're going to come back to that. So first, you look at the first pattern across all of these forums and just look at when is the activity. And it actually looks very similar to our sort of crime in Chicago. Same thing here. Even, we're sitting here with a bunch of smart hacker type people in the room. Even we or you have to sleep, it's a sort of baseline. So I found that interesting. Now, the temporal patterns over the 24 cycle does differ. So this is just taking 16 of them, some Chinese forums, Iranian forums, Russian forums, and there are different patterns here. You see that looks interesting. For example, Hey Shu, a Chinese hacker forum, this one now defunct, or actually over the last couple of weeks defunct. It has sort of a morning and an afternoon cycle, and is this the lunch cycle? We could argue about that. I like lunch. Maybe these guys like lunch too. Here's another one, Russian forum. This looks different. It sort of keeps going through the day. Maybe here we're talking about 2 geographies. Maybe this is the Vladivostok crew and the Moscow crew, to be a little bit simplistic. Could be other stuff. Could be one crew, another crew comes on later. We can look at this across the years. These are looking at some prominent forums, exploit.in and Ajania from Iran and another Arabic forum. It's sort of interesting to look at activity across the year. So here, Ajania, the very well-known Iranian, we'll call it hacker forum, sort of low point at the anniversary of the Islamic Revolution. So get off their computers. This one was interesting, the Arabic one, sort of peaking at Ramadan. So at least asking around to my friends sort of from that part of the world, they're saying like not a lot of other stuff to do. And at that time, and then, everybody gets to party at the end of the year maybe, or, so New Year's low point as well. So just interesting. So now we're going to look at shorter time frames, sort of weeks and days. That's, I think we can sort of find the most interesting stuff. So this is looking at all of our data. It actually turns out that Sundays and Saturdays, even guys in front of the computer do get a break in the weekend. So that was maybe interesting. And then we compare that to this Iranian forum where we see Sundays and Saturdays having lots of traffic. Makes sense because, you know, they work hard in Iran. It's a 44-hour work week, I think, and it's half of Thursday and Friday that's off versus, and so they work in the weekend. But the Wednesday, what's going on here? That's interesting. We're going to come back to that. So the way that I think about this is, can we look at these forums and try to see how they respond to external events? It's a little bit like if I in this room now scream out like, there's a new Flash exploit out, you know, you guys are going to be like, you know, I don't know, that sounds like actually pretty boring, but you know, maybe I'll get a little bit of reaction. Whereas if I go in the street and say that, you know, people are going to be like, who is that lunatic, you know? So you can look at how people respond to things. So here is sort of interesting, looking at exploit.in, again, well-known Russian forum, low Saturdays and Sundays, sort of general traffic. But then we look at post Tuesdays where there's been patch Tuesday sort of stuff going on. So suddenly peak in activity regarding CVEs. So where people are talking about CVEs. So actually the sort of good old patch Tuesday pattern people have seen for the longest of time still is active. This was late last year. So sort of interesting. So you can look at, you know, how they react to this outside pattern and actually comparing the Iranian forum, Ajani here to exploit.in, we get the same. So same reaction on Wednesdays, even though we see distinctly different, you know, for example, weekend patterns here. So pretty neat. We can sort of get a sense here that these probably are people that are interested in exploits and these sort of things. It helps us profile. You won't see this pattern, for example, if you go to a carding forum. So it's, you know, quite different. I should have had that as an example probably. So sort of interesting. So now, let's compare these two, though, and look at the work hours. So here's the Iranians, very active during the day, during daytime, whereas the Russians, nighttime. And it turns out that Tehran to Moscow is only 30 minutes of change in time zone, surprised me, actually. But so this is a daytime crew. You know, we might talk about university students. We might talk about, you know, government employees, who knows? Let's assume that it's university students that are sort of being nurtured. And whereas these guys seem to have a day job and then go home and do their stuff at nighttime. So sort of interesting. So we'll dive into the Iranian forum. And here we see now, basically when we look at vulnerabilities, we have two, what I'll call them the kings of vulnerabilities, Crisis and Hassan 20. So two of our guys here stand out. Now, to be able to sort of understand this at a different level, we're going to dive in and we're going to do what I'll call some clustering math here. And instead of trying to look across time, 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, we're going to basically pivot that data to look at it in terms of Mondays, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, and Fridays. And then we're going to turn each day into 4-hour blocks so 6 blocks of 4 hours. Like a late night shift, an early morning, and then try to see if we now can look at similarities in profiles. Basically, I won't try to go into all the details here, but imagine that if I can see two patterns that are moving in sync, that might tell me that it might be the same guy, or it might be two people who are active at the same time. Whereas if their profile is sort of distinctly different, that might tell me that, you know, there probably are somebody very different. It turns out that you might imagine that this is easy to fake. It's pretty hard to fake this stuff, especially over long periods of time. We can talk about that separately. But so this is going to allow us to do sort of swim lanes of this, or heat maps, if you want, to cluster and find pattern or handles that are similar. We're going to be able to find handles that are distinctly similar. In this case, we're looking at two handles in the Ajania forum that are remarkably similar. They turn out like over here compared to 1.4 million other handles. So the math actually does some pretty cool wonders for us here in a nice way. So cool. All right. So here's a very, what do you want to call it, non-nefarious example, I should say that, non-nefarious. So just somebody who's in these forums selling some sort of IT product of some sort. So just, again, non-nefarious. saying this Hamada botter. And I'm using that because it's somebody who is not handle hopping, but they're actually using the same handle across a bunch of these hacker forums. And at the bottom, we're seeing them from 2013 all the way over to end of into 2016, I guess. And we can see how they start in GazaHacker.com, come on Al Yosh, and then sort of adds a set of forums that they're active in. And then up here, we can sort of see their weekly pattern. And ends up being pretty neat. So now this is, again, I picked this because it's a simple example where somebody's not handle hopping. So, all right, so let's see if we can find some nefarious stuff. So here's our Hassan 20. And so we look at him now, and remember this was the guys who were the kings of vulnerabilities that I talked about before. So now when we cluster this, it turns out that Hassan 20 and Crisis end up next to each other, boom. And we see how Hassan 20 is active, and literally on the day that that handle stops being used, Crisis turns up and gets active. So, very strong indication here of Hassan 20, hopping to Crisis using, just switching handles. This was, again, maybe a little bit of a, too strong of an example, but it's nice, and it shows that it's hard to get away. So, for better, for worse, I'm sure there's some challenges on that, but it's hard to get away from activity, to fool this. So now we can then, create these sort of heat maps and organize our handles. These are from the Iranian forum. We can not only our guy Hassan, but we can, or Crisis, we can find, that he's close to Hassan 20 and Crisis, but we can then start finding hangarounds. So, which could be, again, it could be other handles used by the same character or hangarounds. And now we can use that as a way to sort of dig in and look at the forum post and get the sense of like, is this a crew of some sort? And we're going to come back to that. We can find user pods that are sort of has the same behavior across the whole set. We can use this to dive in and see what these pods are interested in. So last year we blogged about in this forum people who are interested in various sort of rats associated with Android. And so now then I use this as an opportunity to find the set of handles who was actually interested in that and sort of find the pod who was interested in Android rats. So, which could be pretty handy depending on what you're doing. And finally, we can take somebody like the admin of this, and he's not a secret, he's very well known out there, so Baruz Ice, he's on Instagram and he's on Iranian TV and so on, and sort of known as the guy who nurtures this forum. But now we can take this guy and find another, so I ran these 1.4 million handles and said, who's the most similar to him? And so I get this Muhammad AAA on VB Iran, next door handle, which turns out to be very strongly correlated. And now we dive in and see how his activity in Ajanya is all about sort of reverse engineering courses and this sort of stuff. But then we see his activity in this other forum where he's selling web hosting services and so on. So, likely running a little side business here and doing something else. Nothing bad, but, it's interesting. So how you can do this. Cool. So now, that was sort of all in what you would probably call clear web forums. There might be behind passwords or, you need some sort of login of sorts, but it's still sort of in clear web. So let's look at a couple of, dark web stuff. So Tor, and the beauty of this is that it works perfectly well doing it there as well. So now we're looking at some wonderful guy called Oxymonster on Dream Market. Some of you guys probably have heard about Dream Market, one of these wonderful places where you buy and sell all kinds of crap. The Oxymonster, he's selling exactly what you might imagine. And so now we can dive in and find other handles selling similar stuff, it turns out. And I call him the Wednesday night guy here because that's sort of his profile. And, again, it's important, and I'll say this in my conclusion too, these are leads or indications of somebody that might be the same. There's no guarantee that all these handles is the same guy, of course. These are lead generation or, getting your sort of, leads is the word we'll call it. Here's another example. This was well-known last year. Wonderful here in London underground cocaine store that was run for a while. And we take the admin of this wonderful place, and then we find other sort of profiles. And it actually turns out that he's open about the fact that he's selling on Nucleus and Alphabay and other sort of Alphabay is still active out there as a nice forum. or nice, not so nice, whatever. And so again, we can find, this admin, potentially other sort of handles as he's being active out there. So in this case, doing a criminal investigation on this guy, this turns out to be pretty handy. This is all gone, by the way, so you don't need to, if you're looking for the product, London Underground doesn't exist anymore, so just for full clarity. All right, so as our last example, so Real Deal Market. This you might very well have heard of. So you've seen about Yahoo dumps and all these sort of LinkedIn data dumps and so on. And so a lot of that stuff got sold on the Real Deal Market. This was originally put together by a bunch of guys in Russia, maybe 2 years ago or 3 years ago, two years ago, as a place to be. That was going to be cleaner, better organized, better. They just wanted to be sort of better than a lot of the other sort of crap markets, and they had sort of nice the UI. You can see it even here. This looked more organized, and they started off just selling software stuff for exploits and these sort of things. Oh, took a month, and suddenly you could buy drugs and you could buy everything there. So I guess once you're in that business, that's what happens. But so. And a lot of interesting characters have sort of hang out there. So this is one guy that we had a chance to sort of, talk to, we'll call it that. And he made this sort of interesting comment as we were talking about it, and we asked him, so are you part of a group? And he said, the more members a hive possesses, the more processing power and possibilities the hive has. And I think that's how a lot of these guys sort of think. They may not be sort of buddies that hang out like this, but they collaborate in various sort of ways, and they buy and sell, and just people who have different sort of expertise. So this was from a Wired interview with this guy Peace of Mind. I'm sure some of you, this was one of the guy. He's probably not the hacker of Yahoo, but he's one of the sales guys involved in this stuff. So Peace of Mind. So if we now look at this, we look at Peace of Mind in the Real Deal Marketplace, and here's his sort of profile, and so we first find this Optiman guy, who's very sort of similar profile, and then we can quickly get to a few other characters that have very similar profile right in this sort of premier sort of forum place. And we see them they again stand out here, sort of nicely sort of different from all these other 1.4 million guys. And then finally, what we can do with that is sort of looking at the actual sort of activity over time of these people. And what turns out to be pretty interesting is that this Optiman guy, he's sort of been active in various sort of places across the web for a pretty long time. But I'm not sure if this is going to come across all the way here as I talk, but he takes a pause here for a while. And in that particular time frame, we see Peace of Mind and this guy Bank and this guy, what's the last one, Happy Eyes, get active. And that's something that we love, to sort of look for these patterns where somebody takes a pause and something else steps in. And so now you're sort of can use the patterns here, so in a nice fashion. So, all right, so with that, summary. This is sort of, doing pattern of life analysis on, and I'll say it, metadata. We don't look at the actual sort of text and so on. Of course, the next sort of step is to dive into this. Important to say that this is lead generation, not saying that this is, absolute truth. You should combine this with other sort of research methods as a way to sort of, whether you're doing attribution or whatever now may be. There's more math to be done on this and cross-validating and other sort of sources and so forth. But we think this is a very interesting direction to take to be able to deal with people with better OPSEC than the guys who are reusing their handles. So with that, thank you very much. Any questions? Do we have time for one or two questions, or no?
Yes, yeah, but we don't have the mic. So
all right, it's okay.
you're welcome to shout.
Any one or two questions? We have one in the back.
If you were somebody who wants to defend against your attacks, how would you do that?
To stay away from that? There's the old one, if you want to avoid sort of video recognition, you stick a stone in your shoe and you're going to walk differently. And, and people say that's total example of how you can stay away from video recognition. My point is always like it's freaking painful to walk around with a stone in your shoe. So now there are ways, you could randomize your patterns, literally have sort of literally be more random in what you're doing. That's actually the best. Number two, use short bursts of activity, because this does require longer patterns of activity. So use short bursts of activity. Those are the two I'll give you, and I won't give you any more. So how about that? All right. Do we have one more? No? Yeah.
I'm just curious, is any machine learning to do pattern matching?
So this, I wouldn't call this machine learning. I would call this, good old clustering with, good old statistics. You could certainly apply this to, the data is perfect for putting on sort of support vector machine or whatever, But I would put this, everybody, we do a lot of work in AI and so on, but this is good old statistics, I would call it, So. Cool. Thank you very much.